From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Joy Powers. Today we'll learn why citizens can't petition for statewide ballot initiatives and referendums in Wisconsin. Then we'll explore the Milwaukee Public Library's Great Lakes Marine Collection, which, among many other things, documents shipwrecks.
Being able to see 3D models of them really helped me better understand the tragedies I was writing about and helped me figure out how to explain them to other people who also haven't seen boats that look like that.
Plus, we'll get some tips from an expert on how to organize your home during spring cleaning.
As long as you're doing it regularly, 15 minutes a day. You put the food in the oven and now you're going to clean out the junk drawer. Just be consistent with it.
All of that is coming up on Lake Effect. But first, here are today's headlines. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Joy Powers, and thank you so much for joining us. Earlier this year, Governor Tony Evers announced he'll try again to allow citizen-led referendums in Wisconsin by including the change in his upcoming 2-year budget proposal. This process would allow voters to directly enact policies without the legislature's approval. To help explain what a citizen-led referendum is and how it works in other states, Lake Effect's Excret Nunez spoke with Derek Klinger, a senior staff attorney with the State Democracy Research Initiative. He begins by talking about Governor Evers' proposal.
Just unpacking his announcement a little more, he proposed adopting 3 forms of the citizen-led initiative and referendum power. One of these would create a petition process allowing the people to propose and approve amendments to the state constitution, basically allowing Wisconsinites to go around the legislature. Another would create a petition process allowing the people to propose and approve state laws, again, allowing the people to go around the legislature. And the third would create a petition process that would allow the people to hold an election to approve or reject laws passed by the legislature. Now, other technical and procedural details would need to be worked out to create a functioning initiative and referendum process. But broadly speaking, the proposal would create these petition processes to give people a more direct policy-making role in the state.
That's interesting. So, how many other states have this citizen ballot initiative and referendum process already in
Yeah,
place?
yeah, so about half the states have at least one form of the initiative or referendum. And there's some real diversity within this group of states. It's not just limited to any particular region of the country, nor is this limited to like red states, blue states, or even just purple states. It's kind of a mix.
Yeah, and if it's something that's already kind of common with like half the country, why doesn't Wisconsin have a process like this already?
Well, one thing that's important to note is Wisconsin actually has a process like this at the local level in cities and villages. In state law, it's called the direct legislation process. The citizens can use a petition process to propose ordinances and resolutions. So this concept isn't entirely foreign to Wisconsin. But well, why doesn't Wisconsin have this at the statewide level? Well, the initiative and referendum process would require authorization in the state constitution, and I guess the short answer is the Constitution has never authorized it. When the state was founded in the 1850s, or a little before then, no state had adopted the citizen-led initiative and referendum power at the statewide level. So it really wasn't even up for discussion at that point. And it wasn't until the end of the 19th century, the early 20th century, that the statewide initiative and referendum caught on with states. Now, interestingly, the question to whether to amend the Constitution to allow this process was actually put to the voters in 1914, and the voters rejected it pretty handily at that. So I suspect that defeat has slowed any momentum behind it. Now, in the 100 or so years since then, there have been several dozen proposals in the legislature to amend the state constitution to allow the initiative and referendum, but none of them have been submitted for a vote to the people since.
Thanks for clarifying that. So, what are some examples of how people in other states have used the citizen referendum process to make changes to their state laws or constitution?
Yeah, so just from the past decade or so, people in other states have used the initiative process to adopt policies like increasing the minimum wage, expanding Medicaid, limiting gerrymandering, passing campaign finance reforms, and perhaps most prominently, protecting access to abortion.
And is it common that citizen referendums pass in other states? I know you just listed a few examples, but is it common or often that this happens?
Actually, no. So if you look at all the citizen-initiated measures that have been proposed over the past, 100 or so years, only about 40% of them were approved.
Mm,
I think that's important to note because it shows that voters tend to approach these measures with some healthy skepticism. But just because something is on the ballot does not mean it will be approved.
right. And so, what are some reasons people support citizen led referendums, and what are some criticisms of this process?
I think the main reason people support the initiative and referendum is that it provides a way for the people to get policies they want when their elected officials otherwise appear unresponsive to the public's concerns. And from that, others say that the initiative referendum can encourage maybe more interest and participation in the democratic process. There are a few main criticisms. Those kind of range from concerns that initiated measures might be poorly written, or maybe they'll have unintended consequences. There are concerns that minority groups might be targeted or suffer from certain initiatives, or that maybe well-financed special interest groups might use the process to change the law to benefit them financially.
That makes sense. So, if this process were brought to a statewide level here in Wisconsin, what are some proposals Wisconsinites might want to put on a ballot?
Yeah, I think if Wisconsinites had the initiative right now, we might see initiatives to increase the minimum wage, maybe to legalize medical marijuana, maybe even recreational marijuana, maybe enact gun safety measures to maybe guarantee abortion rights in the state constitution, or maybe to reform the state's redistricting process. And also don't want to forget about the veto referendum process either. Again, that's the process that would allow voters to weigh in on laws passed by the legislature. And an example that jumps out to me is Act 10 from 2011.
Mm.
This is the law that effectively ended collective bargaining rights for public sector unions. I would think if Wisconsin had the veto referendum in place in 2011 when that law was first enacted, you very likely would have seen that law put up for a vote by the people. And the similar thing happened in Ohio. A very similar law was passed, but in Ohio, the people have the veto referendum, and so they put that law up for a vote and rejected it.
So, we've established that there's no pathway for Wisconsinites to enact or reject a new state law or amend the Constitution. But, Wisconsin voters did see 5 statewide referendum questions on their ballot last year. So, how do those referendums get on a ballot?
Yeah, so there are a few types of statewide referendums that Wisconsin voters currently can see on their ballots. This includes questions about whether to approve or reject amendments to the state constitution. Those are proposed by the Wisconsin legislature. And as you mentioned, voters saw 5 of those last year. Another type of question voters can see is called an advisory question. These basically try to take the pulse of states' voters on particular issues, but don't have any legally binding effect. Voters most recently saw one of those in April 2023, when they're asked if childless adults should be required to look for work in order to receive welfare benefits. There are a few others types of questions that are much more narrowly focused. But the bottom line is that right now, only the Wisconsin legislature can put statewide referendums on the ballot.
So I'm wondering, why do lawmakers go through this referendum process as opposed to working it out through the legislature?
Yeah, there are a few reasons why lawmakers might do this. You keeping in mind right now that Republicans control the legislature and that the governor is a Democrat and they might not necessarily agree on everything. The current referendum process allows legislators to get past the governor, who has the power to veto laws he disagrees with, but does not have the power to stop these referendums from going on the ballot. So it's a way for the legislature to try to get measures they support, but that the governor does not in place. But another reason is the state's courts. Even if a law has been enacted, there is the possibility that the state's courts could declare the law unconstitutional. But amending the Constitution to allow for a certain policy takes away that possibility. And just one other consideration is that these can have an impact on voter turnout. Having particular issues on the ballot might encourage people to turn out to vote who otherwise might have stayed home. But that could also be a set of citizen-led initiatives. Those can drive turnout as well.
So earlier we talked about how in other states, how often citizen referendums on the ballot pass. So, how often do legislative referendums pass in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so Wisconsin voters tend to approve measures proposed by the legislature. Going all the way back to the 1850s, about 75% of all constitutional amendments proposed by the legislature have been approved by the voters.
Hmm. And why do some people support Wisconsin referendum process, and what are some criticisms of it?
I think the arguments for and against this current process are probably the same, which is that the legislature serves as basically a gatekeeper for the Constitution. Supporters of the current process might point to that and say that the legislative process to get referendums on the ballot results in better designed or more well thought out policies. Critics might point to that same gatekeeper role and say that it limits the debate to measures that are supported by the legislature, but you know keeps off measures that enjoy broad support but are opposed by the legislature.
Well, looking ahead, do you know what referendums from the legislature Wisconsin voters could see next?
So one that voters will most likely see at the upcoming April 1st election is a constitutional amendment proposed by the legislature that would require voters to present a photo ID to vote. Wisconsin law already requires photo ID to vote, but
Hmm.
this measure would add that requirement to the state constitution.
Well, Derek, thank you so much for speaking with me today and explaining the state's referendum process to me.
Yeah, thank you.
Derek Klinger is a senior staff attorney with the State Democracy Research Initiative at the University of Wisconsin Law School. He spoke with Lake Effect's Excret Nunez earlier this year. More than 130 years after sinking, one of the first ever all steel freighters has been found in Lake Superior. It was discovered by the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society last summer, and it was just made public this week. The Milwaukee Public Library has a place where you can find tons of information on shipwrecks from the past. The Great Lakes Marine Collection is full of books, magazines, journals, logbooks, and photos. There are also 12,000 ship files dating back to 1650. Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski visited Central Library to meet with local author Anna Lardnoy, who's written about shipwrecks. They joined Special Collections librarian Tobias Fudge to learn more. Fudge begins by explaining how this collection came to be housed at Central Library.
Herman Runge, he was a collector. He worked for the Milwaukee Road, and so that afforded him a lot of travel. But he was a hoarder. I mean, he collected so much extensively on the Great Lakes ships. And so at the time of his death, at 1958, he bequeathed his collection to us. I know some of the managers had been in talks with him trying to get this collection for some time. And then a year after that, that's when the Wisconsin Marine Historical Society was founded to help process it and also to get other collections and just preserve and protect all this information on the Great Lakes and the ships.
Now, Anna, you're the author of several books, including one about shipwrecks of the Great Lakes here. So what drew you to these stories, and how did this collection at the library play a part in either research or writing?
Well, this collection captured my attention since the moment I saw it. Just walking into the humanities room and seeing the models of ships that are legendary wrecks just helped me dive into their stories so much deeper. And when I walked into where the Wisconsin Marine Historical Society keeps their records, it felt like walking into a magical place. There is actually a piece of the Edmund Fitzgerald in that collection. And I got to see it. I could have touched it. Maybe. Tobias said no. But how magical is that?
Really magical, and it kind of helps break down some of the more intimidating big picture things, right? To be able to kind of scale in on an individual basis. So
I'm not a sailor. I am just captivated by shipwreck stories. So some of the boats that I was writing about, I was not entirely sure exactly what they looked like, and being able to see 3D models of them really helped me better understand the tragedies I was writing about and helped me figure out how to explain them to other people who also haven't seen boats that look like that.
Yeah, I think we sometimes take it for granted living right on Lake Michigan, and we don't have as much ship traffic as there once was. So being able to dive into these and kind of explore the different era of when boats were kings, queens of the lake, our personal ocean, as you'd call it. What did it show you about Milwaukee, in our place in not only trade and merchant world, but kind of how it helped shape our city?
Well, I think that we wouldn't be here without the lake. And the lake makes it possible to bring people, especially over for the development of the Midwest. A lot of the stories that I tell, these tragic shipwrecks, were people who were immigrating from Europe through this path called Up the Lakes, that they may make it to Michigan or make it to Superior, and that is how we get so many Scandinavian and German settlers. They were coming down that path. So I think it shapes the whole area. Milwaukee probably wouldn't be the city it is without having the river coming right off the lake and allowing us to deliver all of these goods that we make and we bought to the city itself.
Yeah, speaking of the rivers, there's a whole subsection of this collection called Milwaukee Waterways. Tobias, could you share a little bit about that?
We have, I believe, 50,000 images. Of those, 1,000 of them have been digitized. You can actually go on our website and be able to see a very healthy chunk of the collection that's been processed, and all the metadata has been added so that they can be more easily searched and found. But yeah, the Menominee, the Kinnickinnick, and the Milwaukee rivers, and the port, yeah, Milwaukee wouldn't exist were it not for where all these rivers come together, yeah.
And some of the images that are in that specific section of the collection, what do they show? What are some of the most common things you see?
Besides the harbors, the port, lighthouses, we have a very good collection of those. And then, yeah, ships, I feel like, is what patrons most often request.
Excellent. So you did a bunch of amazing work before we got here at the library and pulled a bunch of materials for us to look at. So let's take a look.
Here are some blueprints. This is the Prince William V. This isn't the ship that sunk. This is a motor ship that was built a year and a half later to replace it. But we actually have around 200 blueprints and a few maps of harbors, which are fairly unique. Not many people know that we have them. And then over here we've got different maps of, they call them treasure maps or wreck charts, just all the different locations that ships have gone down and over the years.
And something like this really captures a writer of shipwrecks' imagination where all these things are. And the thing I like most about it is this will be forever changing as we have better technology to discover new shipwrecks.
That is true. Yeah, let's take a look at some of the maps on this other side here.
Speaking that to the ever-changing nature of it, I mean, this is a periodical that came out 2021, and yeah, it has multiple articles from the Shipwreck Journal on new information on shipwrecks, shipwrecks that have been lost and people are still looking for, some that have been found, some that are being having more dives in them to find more salvageable equipment or just for pleasure.
Okay, so still with some great imagery and artistry. We're still on shipwrecks, but we have some unique artistic rosters of that. Can you explain?
You can definitely tell that these were made in the 70s. Throughout the collection, you can see it's the same information that's being looked at, but it's being kind of shaped different ways. This collection of these Captain Pete's Maritime maps, a lot of attention to like the actual images of the ships were added, and you can see he needed multiple pages to be able to fit all the different wrecks from the different lakes. I've seen them break down wreck information by which lake, just chronology, which decade it happened in, the type of way that the ships were sunk. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways of looking at the same information.
For sure. So Anna, with what you were looking at and the shipwrecks you picked to write about, do you want to share a particular wreck that caught your attention?
Well, I think that the most famous wreck when we're talking about Great Lakes shipwrecks is, of course, the Edmund Fitzgerald. And it has such a prominent Milwaukee connection because Northwestern Mutual owned the ship. Edmund Fitzgerald lived here in Milwaukee, the real man. And there are pieces of that ship all over this library. And, that's magic. That is how I really got into loving ships, by hearing that song when I was a kid. And then I just discovered this whole world of shipwrecks, and I'm mostly known for writing ghostly tales. And shipwrecks and ghostly tales really do go together quite well. Over 30,000 sailors have lost their lives on the Great Lakes. And those are modern numbers since we have been looking at ships. That number grows every year. And so there's just infinite room for those stories to be told.
And I feel like with the Fitzgerald in particular, and I'll speak personally, I didn't realize it was such recent history. Because you hear the song and you figure, oh, this is an 1800s vessel crossing the lake when, boats were different, technology was different, weather still remains the same. But to have that impact in modern history is a little different, looking at it at that lens versus some of the materials Tobias pulled here of like 1700s plus.
Right. I think if we look just strictly at Milwaukee, maybe one of the most impactful wrecks on the Great Lakes was the Lady Elgin. Not only because just about every one of the casualties was from Milwaukee, but because of the people who were on the boat, it really changed the political dynamic in Milwaukee. And that story can be found here in the library, not only in the Great Lakes collection, but if you look at the political archives and the history of neighborhoods archives, that is all impacted by that one wreck.
Can you share a little more about that?
Well, what happened with the Lady Elgin is that a group of Irish politicians and firefighters were on their way to Chicago to see Stephen Douglas and to get some support for their position here in Milwaukee, and they were very politically prominent. Well, when that ship goes down and most of those people die, there is that vacuum of politics, and that allows the German community, which had strength, to become even stronger.
Obviously, there's so much here, but Tobias, is there anything that you look at in particular or have a favorite material or story?
I don't think there's any one particular record that I like more than all the others. I certainly like we've got a logbook over here, and so we have multiple logbooks, but just being able to hold something that was on the ship that speaks directly to not only where it was and what it was carrying, but the captain's name. This is from the Prince William V. We've got the logbook here, but here's a photocopied version that we can touch a little easier. I just think these first sources are the most interesting to me, seeing what kind of information it held and what was important at the time.
And I suppose that is one good thing about a lot of the materials around ships is by necessity, there is a lot of detail, right?
Right. And for me, it's the artifacts that have come off the ship, because we're touching a piece or looking with our eyes with a piece of history, a living piece of history, and it makes those stories, at least for me, so much more real. When you see, oh, look there is part of the lifeboat to that ship. There is the wheel of that ship that you're immersing your life into, so that's so exciting. And then I don't think I can say enough about how much I do love the models in there, particularly the model of the Christopher Columbus. It is a story I like to tell. The Christopher Columbus goes down the Milwaukee River with a bunch of tourists, and everyone's having a great day, and tragedy strikes. People are thrown into the river in the Third Ward, but luckily everyone is around. It's the daytime, so they can get rescued, but not everyone survives. And I, because I'm a very grim person, find it very interesting that we pleasure cruise down that river constantly over all those unhallowed graves. And that, to me, is spooktacular.
Well, I want to thank you both for helping me dive in a bit into this Great Lakes history. and for especially showing me all these materials. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
The wind in the wires made a tattletale sound, and the wave broke over the railing.
Tobias Fudge is a special collections librarian at Milwaukee Public Library. Anna Larnoy is the author of Shipwrecks of the Great Lakes, among many other books. They both spoke with Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski at Central Library last year. Did you know you can listen to Lake Effect as a podcast? Search for Lake Effect wherever you get your podcasts to download and listen on demand. Liberace, one of the most famous Wisconsin-born celebrities, doesn't have a dedicated memorial in his hometown. We'll tell you all about that in about 10 minutes. But first, if you're starting to think about spring cleaning, we've got some tips. That's coming up next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.
It's too rough to feed you. At 7 p.m. a main hatchway caved in. He said, fellas, it's been good to know you.
You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. Whether you're switching to a spring wardrobe, clearing out overflowing closets, or just have a mountain of unopened mail, decluttering might seem like a big task to tackle, but it doesn't have to be. To get some advice on how to approach spring cleaning, Lake Effect's Excret Nunez is joined by Tamara Starr, a professional organizer and owner of Sweet Simplicity. She shares a few tips and tricks so your home can get and stay clutter-free.
It's that time of year where some people are looking for a refresh at home, but some people might not know where to start. So I thought it'd be best to reach out to you for advice on this subject. But I want to start by asking, what exactly is a professional organizer?
Well, professional organizer is someone that's coming in and working with you, most of the time side by side, helping you get through your clutter. It's sometimes a lot easier than working with your sister or your spouse who might suggest that you get rid of that dress and you feel a little offended by it. Somehow a professional organizer coming in and doing the same stuff seems a little bit easier. And we are also good at reading you and coming up with great suggestions for what to do to make decisions on letting go or how to get the house organized so that you can maintain it after we leave.
That's interesting. I'm sure that through your career, you've seen a lot and worked with a lot of different spaces. But I want to kind of dive into the process of decluttering a home.
Sure.
What's the first step someone should do?
Well, first I want people to realize that it doesn't have to be as hard as you think it's going to be. Don't think that you have to plan the whole weekend or take off of work. It doesn't have to be done that way. As long as you're doing it regularly, 15 minutes a day. You put the food in the oven and now you're going to clean out the junk drawer. Just be consistent with it and touch one drawer at a time, one shelf at a time, whatever it is, just be consistent with them. And then once you've decluttered those little spots, then go back and then do the whole kitchen once you've done all the little things. And don't go pick the sentimental items first. Don't sit down with the photo album. Pick the really easy things to get through first. Some people will go room by room. Some people might pick a category. If you walk into your office, just pick all the Target bags, pick and save bags, your Amazon boxes. Pick those up. Those are the things I'm going to start with when I come in your house. Walk in and just start with those super easy things. And it's like, okay, I've got some of this done. And then when you get in the swing of it, or once those things have been done and the next time you come back, then you can gradually get to the harder and harder things.
Yeah, that's a really great strategy. Okay, so I kind of want to move forward to when you're starting the process of decluttering someone's home or giving advice. Is there a room you suggest people should start with?
I'm always asked where we should get started. My thing is telling my clients to pick the room, the spot that's bothering them the most. So I might come in and see that the living room has so much clutter that I think we should start here. But you might feel every single morning you start your day off frustrated that your bathroom vanity is just a mess. You can't find your things. And that's what's starting off your day. And so let's start there, and then we'll move on to these other areas. Because again, a lot of times you suddenly get motivated that, oh, that wasn't so bad doing the bathroom vanity. Can we just do the linen closet too? Because that's part of
The morning routine.
and then you start figuring out what you want to do next. And we might jump to the entryway, and we haven't even gotten to the living room yet, but you're finding those places that bugged you the most. When you do it on your own, you want to know that 15 minutes or an hour and a half later, you've accomplished something that was worth it, and you're motivated to do it again tomorrow.
Yeah, no, and I know that's a good feeling when you personally, you're like, I did that. I
Yes.
finally cleaned that space. So do you ever have a pile of this is to donate, this is to give back?
What you might want to do is put a basket in your bedroom that once you've decluttered your whole room, you have something in there that once you put something on and realize you don't want to keep this anymore, then you're throwing it in that basket. And periodically you'll pick up that basket and know that those are things that you're going to donate. Or I always say have a spot that your friends or family know when mom stops by, she knows she can dig through that box and help herself to the Milwaukee mug or the blue shirt that she always liked on you. But people can help themselves to things that they know that you're going to get rid of. Because a lot of people struggle letting go because they feel that the donating is wasteful, that they're throwing it away. So when you connect somebody with, I call it something that pulls at your heartstrings, that if I can find somewhere in a charity or someone that's going to use it, then it's a little bit easier for you letting go. So same thing with your clothes, finding some organization that can take it and give to those in need sometimes makes it a little bit easier to let go.
Right. Well, what are some other tips that you typically or sometimes share during your presentations with people?
One thing I really like to do is the container concept. When I was working with a client, we were working in her basement. Her parents had passed away and they moved everything down from their home up north. So we're working together. She was awesome to work with. We were going really fast. She would make decisions and give me the things that she wanted to hold on to. So she was giving me things that she was keeping from mom and dad. So I would put it in a tote, and then she'd give me more, and I'd put it in a tote, and the tote was full, so I got a bigger one. She said that was it. Don't get a larger tote anymore. I will never look at these items anymore. I can't let them go, but I'm never going to open the bin. So we stopped at that size of a tote. Well, now we started finding grandma's stuff. So she gave it to me and I walked over and I went to grab another bin to put grandma's stuff in. And she said, nope, grandma, mom, and dad all go in the same bin. So with the container concept, that decided how much you can keep. It can be a shelf, it can be a drawer, it can be a closet, it can be a room. But you're picking something that limits you on how much you can keep.
So what should people be doing daily, weekly, and monthly to stay on top of keeping their homes clean and organized?
So, when your friend calls and says they're in the area and they're going to stop by, so you quickly clean off the kitchen counter or the kitchen table, flat surfaces. So one of the things I like to recommend is maybe that 15 minutes a day is just making sure that you're keeping your flat surfaces, because those are easy to become dumping grounds, to pile all the mail, the kids' stuff, just walking in the door and dropping packages. Let that be a great way to get started, and making sure that you maintain your flat surfaces. The vanity in the bathroom, the tables in the living room, but keeping control of your flat surfaces would be one thing you could do.
So for people who have implemented these tips in their life, what feedback do you hear from them? What do they say to you after they've kept up, they've been consistent?
I think one of my all-time favorite comments that I get from people that I worked with in the past is that they love being able to shop in their house. Someone recently contacted me and she said that they were going to hang up pictures on the wall, and she knew that I had a bin of all the picture hangers and things like that. And just a simple thing that I had a bin for batteries, and she knew that she could go to the basement and shop. I had another lady who said the exact same thing, that she loved to be able to shop. She entertained, and we created a spot in the basement where this was all the glassware. One shelf in another cabinet was all plasticware. So she would know where to go shop in her house for whatever it is she needs. So I think that's one of my favorite things to hear back from past clients is the shopping. Because when I'm working with them, I'll say, if I ask you for a battery right now, where would you tell me to go look for it? And that's where we're going to create the organizing system. Then they can, again, maintain it after I left. So I like that they know where to go for it, and it makes it easier for them to maintain after I've left.
I love that. Thank you so much for speaking with me today and sharing some great advice with me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Tamara Starr is a professional organizer and owner of Sweet Simplicity. She spoke with Lake Effect's Excret Nunez last year. We've got a new season of Bubbler Talk, and we need some new questions. Submit your questions about the Milwaukee area at wuwm.com. Coming up, we'll learn about famed entertainer Liberace's Wisconsin roots and the search for local recognition of the icon. That's next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. Liberace is arguably one of Wisconsin's most famous sons. He was a pianist, singer, and television pioneer. At the height of his career from the 1950s to the 1970s, he was the highest paid entertainer in the world. Yet there's no monument or even a plaque dedicated to his memory in his hometown, West Dallas. Writer Tom Kirscher researched Liberace's legacy in Wisconsin for Milwaukee Magazine. He joins me to share what he found. So Liberace is one of those names, kind of like Houdini or Madonna, people whose fame has really propelled them into another echelon of fame. And yet, I've been surprised to learn there are a lot of mostly younger people who don't really know much about Liberace. How would you describe him for people who are unaware of his work?
You know, Liberace was really kind of a singular figure in the sense that he did a couple things that no other performer had done to that point, back to the 50s, let's say. First of all, he combined classical music with popular music. He was a pianist and somewhat of a singer. And then more noticeably, his flamboyance. So just over-the-top everything, over-the-top costumes, decorations, jewelry, you name it. And at that point in time, he was doing something other performers had not done and paving the way for people maybe like David Bowie or Lady Gaga. Yeah.
Sure. Now, when I've spoken to my mom about Liberace, she really remembers parts of his history that I did not know about, specifically that he was a child prodigy, in fact. He was born and raised in West Dallas and West Milwaukee. What was his life like in Wisconsin as a kid?
Yeah, I mean, sort of the classic humble beginnings story. His parents worked different jobs. They ran a grocery store out of their duplex, in West Dallas. He lived there for about 5 years, and then they moved to West Milwaukee. And he was working jobs as a young person as well. So very much, a basic kind of existence. But you're right about the prodigy, as a young teenager playing with the Chicago Symphony, for example. So His father was a professional musician, couldn't make a living that way, but did play professionally, pushed Liberace very hard to learn classical piano, and he became quite good at it.
When does he really move from, I don't want to say a novelty act, but when does he move from being a kid playing with the symphony to his own kind of larger-than-life persona?
Yeah, there are different moments, but I think one that stands out, one story that's often told is he was doing a show in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and would play his classical music, very proficiently. And at the end of that performance, asked the audience if they had any requests. And of course, they were not for, Beethoven or Chopin. It was for popular music. And he ended up doing a number of popular songs that, of course, were very easy for him to play, but that the audience particularly enjoyed and sang along with. And that was a moment for him to realize that, hey, this boring stuff, as he called it, the classical music, is great to a point, but it's not my passion, for one thing, and it's also not what animates most people. So he figured out that he could combine the two, dazzle people with his classical piano playing, but then also get into popular music and have them play along, so to speak.
Now, he really ascends to the highest of heights of celebrity at that time. He was comparable, as your piece mentions, to someone like Elvis, who everyone will be quite familiar with. But despite West Allis being his hometown, there's really little there to memorialize him. What are the kinds of tributes that we've seen in Wisconsin to this late artist?
Yeah, that's really the point of my piece, is asking this question. So, I grew up near Milwaukee in Cedarburg, and as a kid was vaguely familiar with Liberace. And then as I grew older, a little more aware of the fact that he was a colossal success. But it didn't really resonate for me until this past November. There was a one-man show called Liberace at Milwaukee Chamber Theater. And, of course, the person who played that dressed like Liberace, tried to sound like Liberace, and was also a very accomplished pianist. And it became visceral for me to hear about his upbringing, his success, and sort of see him, as portrayed by this actor. And it just left me to wonder. I thought, I'm from Wisconsin. I've lived near West Allis for 25 years. I don't remember ever seeing anything remembering him in West Allis. And I thought, this is not a city with lots and lots of famous sons and daughters, right? So I was just struck by that. It made me want to go out and, first of all, find out, am I correct? Is there really nothing to remember him? And if not, why not? And, when I did the research, no statue, no street, no plaza, not even a plaque. And it just was kind of amazing to me that was the case. And so I set about to try to find out why.
Now, this does seem to be part of a larger theme here in Milwaukee. I recently spoke with someone from the LGBTQ History Project about Les Petits Bonbons. They're an internationally recognized group of artists from Cudahy who similarly failed to have been memorialized by their hometown. Is that part of why Liberace has failed to have the same kind of memorials that we see for people, as your piece mentions, like Les Paul?
Right. I do think that's a big part of it. It's not the whole explanation, but it's certainly a big part of it in doing my research, talking to people in West Allis, talking to people who've written about Liberace. The fact that he was a gay man and a flamboyant one at that, the way he dressed, the way he carried himself, quite in contrast with West Allis. As the Historical Society president in West Allis told me, West Allis is pretty meat and potatoes, and I think that's a fair description. So I think one reason is that it was difficult for a city like that, at least back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, to embrace a gay man and a flamboyant one at that. But there's some other factors, too. He did not have a long-time partner, a spouse, who maybe would have picked up the mantle on this and to create some sort of memorial. Did not have children. So I think that's also in the mix. And then finally, just passage of time, right? So if people are memorialized, it's often maybe later in their life or soon after they pass away. But now we're talking about decades have gone by, there's plenty of people now in West Dallas who maybe don't even know the name Liberace.
Now, it's my understanding that Liberace wasn't openly gay, at least for much of his career, but at the same time, that was kind of a central theme where many women fans especially were like, oh, Liberace can't be gay.
There were some real anomalies. I think the biggest part of his audience, of his fan base, were middle-aged and older women and just adored this sweet, gentle, polite, happy young man, and didn't entertain the thought or couldn't imagine that he was gay. And he went to great lengths. Here's a guy who had such amazing success, 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, not just one. 30 million people watching his TV show every week, 6 gold records, on and on and on. Highest paid entertainer in the world at one point in his career. So he was, very motivated to protect all of that and, further his career. And so he was very private about his homosexuality and went to the point of denying that he was gay, was engaged to women, I believe, 3 different times, never got married. Ironically, there was a British newspaper that wrote about him and stated or strongly implied that he was gay. He sued and won for defamation. Now, normally you don't win a defamation suit if what was printed is true. But in that case, he had carried himself in such a way and had always denied being gay that was the image that lasted until near his death. He did contract AIDS and die, and eventually at that point it became public information that he was, in fact, gay.
Yeah. For a man who went to such lengths to ensure at least an element of privacy in his sexual life, it's a bit of a tragic irony that he would die in a way that so many people felt proved that he was gay.
And that may be part 2 of Why No Memorial. So it wasn't, he's homosexual man, flamboyant, dies of AIDS at a time when that, was terrifying the nation, the world, understandably so. And so a lot of stigma attached to that. It's not to say he didn't have relationships with men. He did, and there was one that, fell apart and ended up, the 2 of them were estranged, and some of the rumors that came out, were a result of that. So, yeah, he really did have to fight very hard. But amazingly, when you think compared to the way things are today, was largely successful in keeping all of that private until the very end. Yeah.
Now, there is, for people who've been to West Milwaukee, there's an auditorium named after Liberace. Are there any current efforts to memorialize him in other ways in either West Milwaukee, West Dallas, or the Milwaukee area more generally?
And that was another thing that surprised me about the lack of recognition of him in West Dallas. Normally smaller communities are happy to embrace someone who was born in their town, even if they only lived there maybe 10 minutes, But it struck me that West Milwaukee, which is only a few thousand people, whereas West Dallas is 60,000, West Milwaukee decided, we're going to do something, and they named a school auditorium after him. A pretty significant thing, and even maybe people who've driven by it have mentioned to me, oh yeah, I've seen that auditorium. So there's at least some awareness. But, I started reporting on this story in December, and along the way was trying to keep tabs on, is there any effort in West Dallas to name something for him? And I want to be clear that this is not a crusade on my part. This is me asking a question as a curious resident, curious journalist. Why is there no memory of him? In February, the city put out a sort of semi-formal survey of residents to what should we name a street after, and I think they came up with maybe a dozen suggestions, and Liberace was one of them, but he didn't make the list of finalists. So I'm aware of no efforts now to name anything for him. The current mayor, Dan Devine, who's been in office a long time, has indicated he's open to that, and he's noted that over the years there have been some attempts. A prior mayor many years ago suggested, hey, maybe something should be named after him, and the Historical Society, took some tentative steps. So there have been attempts over the years, nothing really strong, and there's nothing ongoing now that I'm aware of.
You would imagine with a last name like Devine, he might be pretty amenable to that.
Yeah, I think he's open to the idea. He's certainly not looking to, from what I could tell, take the lead on something like this. But he, talked about the value in being able, if something like that were created, some kind of memorial, the value of being able to teach residents. I mean, there's not even anything in the West Dallas School District curriculum that mentions Liberace. It's just amazing. So, I think that at least to the extent that a mayor would have an influence on that, he seems at least open to the idea and supporting something if something credible were put forward, but remains to be seen.
All right. Well, we will see what the future holds. Tom, thank you so much for joining us here on Lake Effect.
Thank you, Joy.
Tom Kirscher is a local writer whose piece on Liberace was featured in Milwaukee Magazine last year. And that wraps up today's show. Thank you so much for being here with us. I'm Joy Powers. If you missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, we'll learn more about the MPS School Board and the kinds of decisions they're able to make. Plus, in a new Bubbler Talk, we'll look into mining that took place around the Milwaukee River. Thanks so much for joining us right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.